Welcome to our first afternoon session on the point of view. I have a few housekeeping announcements that you've probably already heard, but some reminders. Welcome to our 8th annual Broadleaf Writers Conference. We're excited to have you with us. I know lunch was amazing on my end, getting to meet new writers and just to have a chance to network and talk. So that's been awesome. Keep that rolling. If you have a one-on-one pitch session with an agent or a mentoring session that you scheduled, they do ask us to remind you to arrive 10 minutes before your meeting time. Thank you so much for doing this. This is a great experience, and I'm glad y'all are taking the chance, those of you who are doing it. Our official bookseller for the conference is Brave and Kind, and they have a wonderful selection of our writers at the conference and books on writing, and so please check out their selection. Finally, we're offering a pre-registration deal, so don't forget that for next year's conference. This deal is only good through September 30th, so if you like what happened this year and you're like, I'm coming back next year, don't wait to fill out that registration. Also, please make sure that you take some time at some point during the conference to do the survey. The survey really does help us shape what we're going to be doing next year with our conference. So, welcome. Well, as I said, my name is Crystal O'Leary Davidson. I'm a board member of Broadleaf and a writer, and I'm here with our guest today. Our first guest here is John Holman. John is the author of Squabble and Other Stories, Luminous Mysteries, and Triangle Ray. His fiction has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including The Sun, The Oxford American, The New Yorker, and Image. He is a Whitting Award winner, and he teaches at Georgia State University. Next is Lynn Cullen. Lynn is a national best-selling author of historical novels, The Woman with the Cure, The Sisters of Summit Avenue, Twain's End, Mrs. Poe, Reign of Madness, and The Creation of Eve. Twain's End was an Indie Next List selection of People magazine and a Book of the Week and a Townsend Prize finalist. Mrs. Poe was an Indie Next List selection, a Target Book Club pick, an NPR 2013 Great Read, an Oprah Book of the Week, and a Costco's Pennies pick. Lynn's novels have been translated into 17 languages, and she lives in Atlanta surrounded by her large family. Clay Chapman is the author of novels Ghost Eaters, Whispers Down the Lane, The Remaking, and Miss Corpus story collections Nothing Untoward, Commencement, and Rest Area, as well as the Tribe Middle Grade series, Homeroom Headhunters, Camp Cannibal, and Academic Assassins. He also co-wrote Quiet Part Loud, a horror podcast produced by Jordan Peele's Monkey Paw for Spotify. So you can visit him at claymcleodchapman.com, and his new novel, What Kind of Mother, released just this September. So, welcome everyone. This session is going to be about point of view, so it's a craft section. I'm really excited about that. I'm very nerdy about how did you do this or how did you decide this. So I just want to hit the ground running and have each one of our panelists to describe their creative process. So in your creative process, how do you decide what point of view to use when you're writing? So I know, John, you got to go first last time. Do we want to start with Clay at the end? We'll start at that end and work our way back.
We can, everybody's head start
Switch
doing
it
a
up?
pivot.
Yeah.
Want me to start?
Yes, let's let Lynn start. Okay, Lynn.
Gosh, what am I offering here? Because I don't know my answer. All right, now I'm official. Well, the first thing that comes to mind about point of view is somewhere I heard some great advice that if you're going to do first person, you have to have a good reason for it, because it's the easiest one to screw up, to not feel authentic or interesting. I say yes. I think about times I've tried to write first person, but so you have to really have a good reason to do that. Though third person, close, that's my favorite one to work in. I don't know what you guys work in. Same. You have a lot more mobility. You're actually using that point of view. It's the same as first person, but you don't have the same worries about voice. So, that was my lame beginning. Go ahead.
It's so interesting because I love first person for every reason that you described. Like I love the limitation, because when I think third person, even close third person close, like I'm just so lost. Like the God's eye, the kind of omnipotence of it, it just feels so, I personally feel so unmoored, that I need to be in the trenches, or I need to feel the kind of, the guardrails of perspective of first person. So, for me, it's always kind of like, well, who is the worst person to tell this story? And that is usually the character that I choose to kind of pick to kind of be the one. And it's because of those limitations, and I want to be kind of careful about saying handicap, but that idea of like you're kind of tying a few hands behind your back, because it is that perspective that is giving, in all of its foibles, all of its, the kind of subjectivity of that point of view, that person may not have their own biases, might have their own kind of lack of understanding of the story that they're telling, and that in effect kind of influences and enhances the experience of telling the story. Yeah.
Can I make one note? Of the 8 books, I have done children's books as well, but of the 8 adult books I've done, 4 of them are in first person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know the pluses and minuses.
Well, yeah, I've written in both first person and third person, and there are advantages to first person as there are limitations. And for me, the advantage of first person is voice. You can create a distinctive sounding person, and if you can maintain that through the whole story, then you're good to go. And sometimes that's hard to do, because you're in a different mood the next day, and so that voice changes, but you got to stay in the head of the character that you've created. But I like third person close, because you can have the intimacy of first person, and first person is intimate. It is. You're treating the reader like a confidant. And but in third person, you can say things about the character that she may know about herself but would never tell you. And so I like the flexibility of third person close, because you can have a close-up shot, to use a film analogy, and then back off to give information that she might not want to reveal.
So you are already answering my second question, which is your favorite points of view, but I am curious, have you ever been working on a project and you started it in one point of view and then you changed the point of view? And I was wondering if you've ever done that. Why did you make the change? Was it successful? What went on with that process?
Well, I'll keep going here. I'm trying to remember.
Can you speak a little closer?
Yes. I don't know why I have a fear of the microphone. I think that, when I'm emotionally close to something and I start in first person, then I can feel a little too reticent about being honest, and then I have switched to third person just so I could feel more at ease with the story that I'm telling. And then I usually just stay there, I think that if you're too emotionally close to the subject matter and you're using first person, there's a tendency to think that who you're writing about is yourself, and third person can provide some distance there. It can make me stand back and look at myself as if I were someone else.
I think one of the values to first person to me, and one of the kind of challenges is that like it's, I always kind of ask myself, what is, like, who is telling the story and why, and like that the actual act of telling the story is a part of the narrative. Like you know, there needs to be a reason behind like why is this person talking to me for 300 pages, 400 pages, and like you know the kind of granting permission for this narrator to kind of speak to this captive audience, and that can be challenging, and the times that it's veered off or I've kind of lost that thread, it's not so much that I shift to a different kind of narrative point of view as much as I start to kind of ask myself, well, why is the narrative kind of, you know, veering away? And it's either a question of kind of bringing it back or reevaluating the way in which I'm telling that story, or that the narrator is telling that story. But also, a lot of the characters that I write from the perspective of are unreliable narrators, and they're just lying. Like, all storytellers are lying to some extent, and it becomes a kind of fun challenge of like, well, why give this person, like, why are they telling the story, and why should I trust them? And in like pure Poe fashion, like it's just fun to start exploring the kind of like ramifications of first person and trust.
I actually haven't much to add to that, because that's a very good answer, except for changing points of view. Someone brought this up in the session. If audience member, if you're here, raise your hand, because you brought up a very valid point that has happened to maybe all of us, that if things aren't going along well in a book, changing point of view might be the thing that unsticks you. You just needed to change that or character. You know, maybe you need to tell from another character's point of view.
For each of you, does the form of the work, short story or novel, or maybe genre that you write in, generally dictate your point of view choice? Or is it something else that maybe we haven't covered yet?
I mean, I've been copying Poe for a long time, and I feel like I'm writing Poe fan fiction. Like I'm just doing Telltale Heart over and over and over again, and I love it. And you know, I kind of I want to own it because I feel like there was something so kind of impactful about reading those stories for the first time, and how, you know, I'll remember the first time Holden Caulfield talked to me, and like there's something kind of magical about that. And you know, I tend to focus on genre, on like the kind of darker end of the spectrum in horror or thriller, and but those waters are always kind of charged with like you want someone in the trenches with you, and I think first person narrative kind of allows, there's a more of an engine behind first person than third, where it's like the urgency of like, I need to tell you this story because the clock is ticking or time is running out, or you know, there's always a kind of external force driving the narrator to tell the story. I find within a lot of genre work that it pushes the narrative forward or propels it in a way that might not be there in third person, or that I have a harder time initiating in third person.
I'm just going to say, it's not answering the question, but it's interesting. I wrote a book based on Poe's work, but from a whole different perspective. I used his work, I tried to explain his personality and what was going on in his life through his work.
Yeah.
So,
What was the point of view? What was the perspective?
it was the perspective, so we do get into it. I didn't want to do it from Poe's point of view. I wanted to do it from a woman in his life who I found out, I was reading about, okay, I'll back up a little bit. Years ago, my husband had encephalitis, and I had a brain injury, and my book contracts fell through all at the same time. And the day I brought him home from the hospital, I was thinking, how am I going to support us? How am I going to support us? And Poe popped in my head, which is weird because I was not a Poe fan. I just read Poe in high school, that was it. Poe popped in my head, and I ran to the computer, looked him up, and I liked that he was an orphan. Because I love an underdog. I will only write about underdogs. And I like that part of him. But I thought, what about the women in his life? Well, I was reading in 1845, he had everything. That was his pinnacle year with the Raven. But within 1 year, he lost all his stature in the writing community. He was kicked out of all the literary groups. He lost his literary magazine. And he was even kicked out of New York to the point where he had a little tiny, tiny cottage in the Bronx for them. And I thought, this is all in 1 year's time. And I thought, what happened in 1 year's time? A woman happened. And that was, there was a woman named Frances Osgood, who was a woman writer, who was supporting herself on her writing, which is unheard of. It's hard for us. It was impossible. Nobody did it back then. And when I heard about this woman supporting herself with her writing, I thought, I know you. And so that's why I chose her. I do believe they had an affair. And so I was looking at his fall, his rise and fall, through his books and also through their relationship and her. So,
First person.
you know, I did write her that first person. Yeah, because I knew her, just like what you were talking about. Sometimes you know them that well. I was her. By the way, I always forget to tell this. My husband did finally recover. It was even better. You know, he was not a reader. He just read magazines and newspapers cover to cover. But he was in bed for months when I brought him home, and he couldn't read. Literally, he couldn't read. But he started asking he got sick of TV and said, "Can I read some of your books?" And I'm like, "Okay, you can read whatever books that we can." And then he started talking to me about there were different novels. He talked about the characters and the endings, and he was back. Books actually are what healed him. Reading.
No, yeah.
No, not my books. My friends' books.
So many of you are connecting already point of view with other aspects of craft. What is another aspect of craft when you're constructing a long work, let's say a novel, that you find challenging, that you need to sometimes balance out against point of view? Like maybe I'm asking plotting versus pantsing, though I hate that phrase. But when you're figuring out your creative process and you're figuring out point of view, what would be another a thing in the craft of writing and constructing your story that you're having to balance that against or struggle with? I just broke that. Okay.
What occurs to me as a craft aspect of point of view, and first person in particular for a long work, even a short work, if it's first person past tense, then you're sort of dealing with what I've heard one person call the double I. So the I that's narrating the story now, and then the I that's being told about. So you've got two time periods. One is sort of implied from the narrator's perspective of now telling the story, and the other, you however far back you are. So the retrospection is a thing you have to take into account. How many years or months or days are you away from the action that's being told about? And what, and as Clay was saying, so that it has to do with why you're telling the story, in first person. Because you've made some analysis on your earlier life that is important for you now to make a claim about or to explain, And so I don't know if this is answering your question a lot or well, but that is a craft aspect I think that a lot of writers ignore, you know, when writing first person, past tense in particular, is that you really got two characters there, you know, that you have to sort of develop or explain to the reader somehow.
It's really interesting.
I love the idea of the double I. I've actually never heard the double I, but I always like the layer of this is who I am now, presently, telling you the story of this thing that either happened to me or that I witnessed in the past. And that layering up of the narrator is great, because I always tell my students, you know, like, who are you talking to? Who's the narrator speaking to? And thinking of like who's the reader? Like, you know, the reader's gonna come to this and say, who am I in this dynamic? And, you know, the reader is almost like a silent scene partner to the narrator. And, you know, there are some stories or novels that are very overt about it and like cast the reader as like the judge, the jury, the, you know, whomever. And, you know, that is fun and engaging, because you as the reader are suddenly like, oh, they're talking to me, like, this is great. But also, like, I think a kind of more subdued, subtle version of that is just, I don't know, like in theater there's always the fourth wall, which is that omnipotent kind of space that separates the audience from the performance. And I think books kind of take that fourth wall and almost kind of penetrate. There's like like the direct address, like it's like you are speaking to me, and I find that to be fun. But the challenge that I find in trying to do that is voice, and the idea of being truthful not only to the story but to the character, to the narrator. And it's awful for my family, but I will be in my room reading out loud as I'm writing, and they'll be like, "Dad's talking to himself again," you know, and it becomes this, but the kind of cycle of like, it's not like audiobook narration, but it's like wanting to kind of hear it out loud, hear the story out loud as a way of kind of like channeling the voice. And I find that to be a fun challenge, but a challenge all the same.
Oh, I had a question. Can you speak to the pros and cons of first person present tense?
That's a great question. I was about to ask that.
Maybe the segue.
What was the question?
The question was the challenges of first person present tense. And I guess, do any of you actually write or have written in that tense?
I think I have. I mean, I can't recall a particular story right now that I've written in first person present tense, but I do like the present tense, you know, for the immediacy that it creates. You know, you cast the reader in the now with the characters. It does take away that retrospection I was talking about. You know, the narrator may be all the more unreliable, you know, in first person present tense. Not having had a chance to analyze her, you know, the action that she is going through, or maybe trying to hide something at the moment, you know, so that you can exploit that unreliability in present tense, maybe even more vitally than you can in past tense.
Yeah, I'll just add that with present tense, there's much more of an urgency, and with past, there's more of that reflective kind of looking back. But also, you know, in the present, they're reacting just as much because it's happening in the moment, and that almost gets maybe a little tedious of like, what's happening behind the door? I'm gonna open the door. Like, oh my gosh, it's, you know, where in the past there's at least a layer of kind of having the patina of the reflection and possibly that kind of dishonesty that comes with it. Yeah.
All I want to say is, do you guys actually think these things as you're writing? Like, are you consciously making choices? Or, because the reason I can't talk about this very well is because it's intuition. I don't even make the choices. Though it's fascinating hearing about it from you guys.
Well, it is intuition. I mean, in terms of what point of view to choose to write a particular story is intuitive for me, for the most part. You know, but then, but again, you know, I may have an idea to write in first person, but then, you know, as I said, find myself in trouble there somehow for some reason. I'll switch it up. You know, a lot of what I'm saying that sounds like I think about it a lot is because I teach a lot. You know? So
Maybe they're unreliable.
And but you know, I wrote a story called Rita's Mystery, in which a man is at a first time at an AA meeting, and he's first time, you know, giving testimony at an AA meeting, and he's telling about he's trying to understand the concept of faith that this group of people he's talking to seem to rely on to overcome their addiction. And he tells a story about his wife, something that happened to her, that he's having trouble believing, and he wants to have faith in her. And in the process of his talking to them about his problem, he narrates her story that she told him. So it's like a layered voices and layered perspectives. So that didn't occur to me as I started writing the story, but as I got into it, I said, well, yeah, I can work with this. You know, I can, you know, make something out of this layering process. You know, all these voices, and so you know, I don't go into it with all the intelligence, you know, but if it ever is intelligence, but there's a point, you know, when you have to apply a kind of critical judgment to the work you've created, you know.
So I actually had a question about like deliberately choosing POV. Recently I wrote a story that has a deliberate change in POV towards the end for kind of like a dramatic thematic effect. Would you say that that's a valid choice, or is it better to just usually keep it consistent?
Okay, for our streaming, or if you're in the back and you didn't hear, we had a question about a change in point of view. Have the writers ever had a deliberate change in point of view for a dramatic effect?
Yes. And my most recent novel, What Kind of Mother, it's kind of a nested doll narrative where it starts off from the point of view of one character, and it's first person, and that narrator can tell but so much of the story before, like her viewpoint is just, it's limited. And but then there's a kind of counter narrative that happens in the middle that shifts different character, different point of view, and it kind of catches the reader up to everything that the other narrator doesn't know, couldn't know. And that's privileged information that the reader only has. This other narrator doesn't know any of this stuff. So it's like, you know, you're now, as the reader, kind of complicit in this kind of like, oh my God, I know more than she does, and that's kind of like, you know, she's walking into that room, and that's not a great room to walk into anymore. So, I mean, yes, I think if it benefits the story, if it's, you know, I'm a big fan, and I mouthed off about this in the last panel I was on, but I think Rashomon is a great example of, you can have an event, you can have a story, something that happens, but the subjectivity of everyone in this room, like that, we all have very individual points of view, because I'm looking at you, and you all are looking at us, and like, you know, the people streaming are, you know, like if they were all here to tell the story of today, of now, it would be very, very different, and it would be because of their point of view. And but it's telling that macro story. Like that's what I love. Like we're all kind of contributing to some larger narrative, and it pieces itself together to form whatever the story may be.
Oh, we have another question.
My question refers to what you were talking about at the beginning. How does third person close differ from third person center of consciousness? It seemed like you had a little more omniscient narrator slipped into the third person close, whereas I think of third person center of consciousness, it's kind of an old term now, but as being, even though it's third person, everything is only what that character thinks or sees. So are they different or the same?
Okay, so we had a question about, is there a difference between third person close or third person limited, center of consciousness? Do you see a difference in those? Then, and am I correct in
Yes.
those three? Okay.
I don't know.
Who's the third person first?
Well, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying. I think can be a slight difference if you think of the center of consciousness being always in the head of the character. So the story is told through that character's perspective, but then you can still have a third person close that can stay there all the. I mean, I think there's a version of third person close that corresponds to that description. But then there's a version that can pull back, and talk about the character or talk about the world, not necessarily through the character.
Like to say where they just went or something like that?
Yeah. Or can stand back and say what they did in third grade, while the character is busy shopping for cantaloupes, right, and thinking about cantaloupes, not thinking about third grade. But the narrator can provide that information that the character may, not have on her mind.
Along those lines, I was thinking about William Faulkner's story Barn Burning. Every time I teach it, I have to remind myself it's not first person because it's such a third person limited to that young boy's point of view. And we don't get other characters' point of view or I guess, commentary about those characters. I had a question about the use of first person. Do you ever find that you yourself are worried you're revealing too much about yourself through first person, or is there this false perception from readers that that first person character is you or an aspect of you?
I'm just going to jump in real quick. You two teach, and you have so much more to say about the techniques than I do. And this is an education for me. Thank you. What was the question again? I actually had an answer. But so I'm thinking about
the idea that when you're in first person, do you think that maybe sometimes you're revealing too much of yourself? It's too much of a vulnerable position, or do people assume that about your first person characters? Because I know you said in Mrs. Poe, that woman, she was you.
She was, but I never feel like, even though it's your thoughts and your personality in some ways, I never am actually, it's me writing an autobiography. It really feels different. Like if I was writing an article about myself, I would be, it just feels totally different. So I don't ever worry about that. It's my character, even though it's first person, and you can't help but inject yourself a lot in your characters. I don't know. Don't you? You never confuse yourself for your character?
I personally don't confuse myself, but when you write in the genre, if you write in the horror end of things, like everyone's kind of worried about you,
Right.
whether they actually think that you are writing about yourself or you're just writing about these dark things, and therefore there's like a moment of like, you okay? But it is always kind of interesting when you do find yourself in your writing, like whether it's an autobiographical moment or an emotion that, for me it's not write what you know, but write what you feel, and you're always kind of finding these kind of, universal emotional truths that connect you to these characters. And when that happens, it's not something that any reader would ever connect A to B, but that you can say, oh my gosh, that is my emotional truth. Like that is a feeling that I have felt, and that is what's kind of fueling the narrative fire and kind of propels it forward. But I'm never going to say what part.
Is that a wonderful moment? That just sounds wonderful.
I mean, it is a wonderful moment. I mean, I think, you know, you were saying on the earlier panel of like, it's a good day to write, you know, you set the goal of like 500 to 1,000 words, and that could be 2 to 4 pages. And then maybe a great day is when you discover you've written 8. And like when a narrator kind of takes over and kind of like, you're just writing, and you're in that zone, and you've written beyond whatever kind of your expectation was, it's usually because I have personally connected to the narrative in whatever that moment is, whatever it is that I'm writing. I'm in that zone, and I've connected to that character, and I'm just letting that character kind of speak their mind and their piece. And it might not end up in the actual piece, the story, the novel, but it was just that kind of liberation of just like, it's out and it's on the page, and I'll look at it tomorrow and I'll realize half of it is awful, and I'll cut it and mine the good stuff.
We kind of hit on this on one of our panels last time, or that I had just now, and an audience member was talking about how it felt about when you hit it like that, and that's our gift. That's for all the work we put in, and there's no explaining it. I liked how you thought perhaps it was connecting to some universal feeling. I don't know, that there's so many, whatever, it's really impossible to explain, but that's what we're all shooting for every day. Not that we hit it every day.
I don't know that I forgot the question myself. You asked the question.
And the idea of writing in first person,
Oh.
that are there times that you feel, well, I've seen really inspirational moments here, but any moments that are kind of vulnerable for you when you're writing in first person, or this idea that other people assume things about you because you're writing in first person?
Okay. Yeah, I try not to. I don't. I hide behind my character. You know, I don't worry that people are going to think that it's me that I'm writing about. But again, as I said earlier, sometimes writing in first person about an actual personal memory can impede me from telling the truth, you know, because I worry that somebody's going to know it's me or think it's me, or I know it's me. And so I'll switch to third person just to give myself that little wall of security. I think though that, you know, early writers or young writers in writing first person can not know the difference between writing about themselves and creating a character who's writing about himself, you know. And so I often ask them in my intro classes to write in third person, because then they can hide behind the fact that, you know, this character is not them. They don't have to worry what the rest of the class is thinking about them, at least hopefully. And then they can tell the truth. And they may have an opportunity to be more honest, and which is what any story wants, you know, is honesty. Not necessarily the truth about actual facts that happened, but, you know, the emotional truth, you know. And so I think that you know, writing in third person, at least early on, can help a young writer, get to that emotional truth and put it on the page without being afraid of being judged for it.
One of the most interesting moments I had as a reader was discovering the writer Lori Moore. She writes short stories often in second person, which I just was like, I had never read anything like that before, and it's something that I'd like to try some. I was just wondering, is there someone that you have read that they did something interesting in their use of point of view that might have inspired you?
Well, I've written in second person sparingly, and because I've read, Laurie Moore and Jay McEnany, Bright Lights Big City back in the 80s, and I think I'm blanking on the name now of is it Tim Robbins or Tom Robbins?
Tom.
Yeah, Tom Robbins has some moments of his novels that have been in second person, it's an interesting point of view because it's both intimate and distancing at the same time. I like to think of it as the point of view of the dream. If I'm dreaming about myself, I still don't feel like it's. I feel like I'm telling myself what you are doing, right? Somehow that makes any sense. So and it can invite the reader in the place of the character. But it also, the other kind of second person is kind of like the how-to, the instructional second person, the imperative, you do this, you do that, kind of thing. So, yeah, I like the second person, but I don't think it should be overused, So, but it's available, to us.
Has anyone read Paul Auster's The New York trilogy? It's an amazing, it's 3 novellas, and I think the middle one is second person, and it's called City of Glass, and it's amazing. You read, there's certain books that you find at the right age, and they just kind of inform you, and I think The New York trilogy is a wonderful, Paul Auster I think is a wonderful author, and it emboldened me at a point in writing. I'm working on my next book, and it's in 3 sections, and the 3rd section is in second person, as though Anderson Cooper is talking to you. And I'm saying this out loud now because I can nearly guarantee you my editor is going to get back to me and be like, what the hell have you done? And it's either it's going to be either that she says get rid of Anderson and or get rid of second person, and there's just that like feeling emboldened. Well, like Paul Auster did it, or just like Laurie Moore, and I want to at least kind of go on record so the people at home can know that that first draft was like, this is what it was, and it was like, this was my exploration, and I might fail miserably, but it was fun to kind of explore second person, and I don't know if I will ever go back.
Haven't done it. Well, we have time for more questions. So does anyone have questions for our panelists about point of view or questions about craft that they'd like to ask? Yes.
How many POVs would you be brave enough to put in one novel? And how many would you just turn away from if the book was presented to you?
Okay, so our question was, how many points of view could you put in a novel? And I guess the second part of that is, how many are too many points of view for a novel?
Well, I think a novel can hold as many as you want, I'm thinking about Terry Jones's first book, Leaving Atlanta, that it's made up of 3 parts, and they're all in a different point of view. One is third person, one is first person, and one is second person. So it can work, depending on the overall project.
I feel like you should just populate the world with as many narratives as you want. I love, I mouthed off about this at the last panel, but there's this wonderful book of prose poetry called Spoon River Anthology by Edgar Lee Masters, And it's like just a town, Spoon River's graveyard. Like everybody who's in the graveyard is just having their moment to kind of tell the story of this town. And it's a beautiful, like, because you learn about like, oh, this character references that character, and like you're learning about this larger world. And it's like 200 pages of 200 different people, and I think it's a very beautiful kind of way of telling a story. So beautiful that my first novel when I first draft, I sent in this novel to my editor, and it had 33 narrators. First novel, like the mistake I made was, as someone who had started off writing short stories, all I knew how to write were 10-page things. So I was like, oh, I'll just make a collection of short stories, and like each character kind of tells a larger part of the story. My editor looked at it, and she would not talk to me for 3 months. And when she finally did, she was like, you're going to get rid of 27 of these narrators, and you're going to do it A to B, and like, and it was a tough road to hoe, but like that ended up being the novel. So I kind of failed at my own personal Spoon River, but I feel like the story should dictate how it wants to be told, and if you've got characters who want to tell that story, I think there's great value to that. Whether or not they all make the cut, I think is a different question maybe.
Yeah, and listening to the discussion, I think it's, I've been getting confused about, do you mean point of view, like different types of point of view, or different characters? And that's a whole different thing, because like with my most recent book, I had several, each chapter or each section began with a person telling their story, and it connected to the whole story. But yes, there's different, but the thing is I did it in third person. It's not like, these first person ones. So you can have lots of characters telling a story, but not always in first person. And I'm thinking this is a sort of not the same thing at all, but in Olive Kittredge, how those are all, what is that called, you teachers? When you have all these different stories, but they all are telling the same story. You need each of them.
I recommend. I like that genre, that form, and I've sort of fallen upon it as something to do. That's what I work at, so I call it linked stories, or story cycles, some people call it, or novel in stories. So there's a lot of names for it.
Yeah, I love it too. And the thing is, my agent and editor, who are really my only first readers, I always use them. They always tell me, this is episodic. And I'm like, no, I'm doing these linked stories, darn it. So that's what gets me. They're always calling me for episodic, in early drafts.
Right.
What do they mean? I can't figure out what they mean when they say that.
They might mean that each part seems like a different episode, but not of the same plot necessarily. I'm not sure,
See, because I'm looking at it as linked stories,
right.
But they,
Yeah.
we work it out.
I wouldn't worry about it. I would embrace your episodic nature.
I know. I feel like I should argue with them, and I kind of get away from it. But, yeah.
Your career in TV is set because that's all people want. They want these miniseries and anthology series like that's.
And in that, I do watch my series, and we're all getting trained to think like that, and that's why I think that kind of writing is appealing more and more.
I think you're right. You had a question?
So I may not use the right words for all this, but because I'm not an editor, but I picked up a book about editing from Louise Hanby. Is that a name that anybody recognizes? She's in the UK. And she talks about omniscient third person. And I think one of the terms she uses is omniscient third person. It might be the word limited, meaning you can be an omniscient third person narrator, but you don't want to go head hopping within the same scene. Is this making sense what I'm saying?
Yes.
Seeing lots of nods. Okay, so within a scene, I get it. I went back and looked at some things I'd written. I found myself head hopping. But what is the difference between that and writing in third person omniscient, where is it possible to write a whole chapter that's made up of several scenes where the narrator is giving you insights to what's going on with several different characters? So I guess I had to think that through how to say it, but I guess what's the difference? Here's the question. What's the difference in an omniscient third person narrator giving you insights and information about or from several different characters' point of views within a chapter versus what she called head hopping?
Okay, our question is the difference between third person omniscience, where different characters have different points of view in one chapter, versus the criticism of a writer head hopping.
I don't know. That omniscient is hard. I'm thinking though what you were saying reminded me of Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, that first section, which is they say she's using a stream of consciousness narration, and she is head hopping really, across among the characters at the dinner table, and so it's difficult to read it though because you're never quite sure where you are.
That's what the criticism was from the editor, and then it can cause the reader to lose connection.
Yeah, I mean, but if you're Virginia Woolf, you can get away with it.
Not.
Not yet, right?
No, not yet. Not there yet.
One of the things that gets me about it, when I read about it or read stories where people do that, it's really jarring if they haven't done it all the way. That might be helpful if from the start you're head hopping. Because that's what drives me nuts. You'll be reading along in a book, and all of a sudden, after 100 pages, they do that a little bit, and that makes me crazy.
You have to establish that that's how the story's going to go from the beginning. Really.
Oh, okay.
Sort of set the contract or establish the rules for the narration in the first sentence or paragraph, and then go for it.
I think we have time for at least one more question, so.
Well, this isn't a question. I just wanted to say that this has been an extremely valuable panel. Exceptionally, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Anyone has one about craft or point of view? Yes.
I'm curious if anybody's ever worked in, appreciates, or whatever. It's a third-person omniscient style you don't see as much these days, where authors, from that all-knowing perspective, would get kind of chatty with their own opinions, like Dickens, Douglas Adams, that sort of stuff. Has anybody tried that sort of thing?
So the question is, third-person omniscient point of view where the author himself or herself or themselves gets chatty and kind of infuses the author's personality into it.
Or the narrator.
Or a persona
or the
the author
narrator.
has adopted
Yes.
as the narrator.
The narrator's persona.
No, I've never tried to do that. I don't have the confidence to be, I guess that sort of, I think another term is like third person omniscient essayist in a way, where you sort of offer opinions and along with the story. So no, I've not done it.
It was a good question.
The thing is, anything you do, you just got to do it all the way. If you're going to do that, make it clear from the start and go all the way with it. It could be really interesting.
You know, it's interesting because in the times that I've written third person, my editor, if I stray into that, my editor will flag and say, "This is you. This sounds like the author is talking right now," and that tends to be the stuff that goes. I'm not a, you know, if it was me trying to you know, like if I was a character within, like now the narrator is a part of the kind of telling of the story, of that third person story, then I think you can kind of get away with it. But if my editor ever gets a whiff of me kind of contributing my own opinions to what's happening in the action, she's like, this feels like the author is stepping into the action, and then that gets cut. But even in third person, like if I'm writing something, I want to like have a target, even if I don't address who that target is. Like I want to know who the reader is, and so I am talking to them as a third person narrator, as a first person narrator. But like I don't know, like when you write a letter to someone, you know who you're writing this letter to, and I feel like the way that I kind of get over that hurdle of third person is just to imagine who that reader is and have a kind of visual of like, I'm writing to my mom, I'm writing to my best friend, I'm writing to whomever, and it just allows me to kind of tell the story a little bit more.
I think I saw hands up. Do we have? Okay, well, if you do have a question about this, I'm sure our very learned panelists would be happy to talk to you more about point of view. I found this a great panel. I know I learned a lot. I love craft panels like this. So thank you very much for your insight, and thank you for attending.